And next we'll go with the program.
Our speaker tonight is Karl Lutzenschwab, K9LA. He began shortwave listening in the late 1950s. He received his novice license then in 1961. His call sign was W9AVT, and he selected his current call sign K9LA in 1977. Now, Karl is an electrical engineer graduate of Purdue University and was an RF design engineer for Motorola and Magnavox Raytheon until his retirement in 2013. Now, Karl enjoys propagation research, DXing. He's at the top of the honor roll, by the way. Contesting. He was editor of the ARRL's National Contest Journal, NCJ, from 2002 to 2007. He also enjoys playing with antennas and restoring and using vintage equipment. He and his wife, Vicky, AE9YL, enjoy traveling, which has included expeditions to Syria, the Market Reef, and numerous trips to the Cayman Islands. He has written monthly propagation columns for the World Radio and NCJ, and has written solar and propagation articles for many other amateur radio publications. In his spare time, Karl writes and manages his website, K9LA.us, that offers a wealth of information on propagation. Now, Karl was formerly the vice director of ARRL Central Division. He now serves as the director of our Central Division and is on several of the ARRL committees as well. So, Karl, take it away.
Thank you, Jean Ann. By the way, I met Jean Ann at HRO this year, and it was a pleasure to meet her. I also saw Gary, W9XT, there in the audience, and also W9KEY. So I'm familiar with them because W9KEY had some comments to the thing we're going to talk about today. So let me share my screen, I hope. Okay, so we're going to talk about HF trading. It's also referred to as HFT, shortened up a little bit. Everything's got to have an acronym nowadays, I guess. So there's my email, K9LA@ARRL.net, if you have any questions later. What is HF trading? Well, first of all, it's good to talk about financial trading. What you do there is you watch the stock market, right? Then you tell your financial advisor to buy when the stock market goes down and to sell when the stock market goes up. And you can do that via telephone, or you could use your computer via the internet to do that. It still involves people, which kind of slows down things. But there is a faster way, and that's via radio waves at HF. HF being 2 to 25 megahertz for this issue we're talking about. Of course, radio waves travel at the speed of light. And what you can do is probably just let your computer monitor the market and make trades automatically. But you got to be quick because time is money. Takes time to call your advisor and have him do something, or even using your computer on the net on the internet. It takes a while, but the big push is because radio waves can traverse large distances very quickly. So that's what HF trading is, the fastest way to get decisions implemented so you can make more money. Now, I think what we're talking about here is really people way above my pay grade. That's for sure. And that's why they're doing it, or want to do it, let's say. So The Shortwave Modernization Coalition, sometimes abbreviated SMC, not to be confused with the Society of Midwest Contractors, they proposed changes to Part 90 of the FCC rules. So what is Part 90? Well, Part 90 is the land mobile radio service from 2 to 25 megahertz. It's not the amateur radio service, and we're under Part 97. So what are the existing Part 90 rules before we get into what the Shortwave Modernization Coalition wants? Well, there are 3 emissions types that are allowed under the Part 90 rules. The emission designators are on the far left there, 2K80J3E. That tells us that that is single sideband in a 2 kilohertz bandwidth, which that's basically what we use in our amateur radio applications. There's also 2 others, which I'm not sure what they're used for, but they're very narrow telegraphy type stuff. So what's really important for Part 90 is the sideband. The rules say you can run up to 1,000 watts peak envelope power. That's about compatible with amateur radio here in the US. We can run a little bit more. And there's a spectral mask. In other words, if you're looking at a spectrum analyzer, the signal would be centered at 0 on the left, and all the emissions from that signal, from that waveform, have to be below the blue line. Now, what's important to note is the width of the emissions is just a little bit above 2.8 kilohertz. So it gets all the emissions from that transmitter down quite a bit very quickly. And most of what's there is just the 2.8 kilohertz signal. Now, what frequencies are allowed in Part 90 rules? Well, they're listed in the center column there in that figure. And you can see they go from 2 megahertz all the way up to 25 megahertz or 24,890. On the left column are our amateur bands. For example, I highlighted the ones with red arrows that puts the Part 90 band right at the edge of an amateur radio band. Let's look at the heavy red arrow. That's 40 meters. The Part 90 rules allow transmissions from 6.765 to 7,000, 6.765 to 7.0 megahertz. Of course, our band starts at 7 megahertz and goes to 7.3. So they could have a signal on right at 7.000 megahertz. It's right at our band edge. And the result of having a sideband signal that's only 2.8 kilohertz wide is not very detrimental to our operations. And I'm sure that's how all those rules got put together. Now, the center frequency is not allowed in our bands, but the center frequency can be at or very near our band edges. Now, if you have a very wide bandwidth waveform, that could be a problem. It'd be nice to have some guard band implemented here, but it's not there. So the right column just indicates which of the Part 90 frequency bands are immediately adjacent to an amateur band. There's quite a few of them too. So here's what the Shortwave Modernization Coalition wants to change. They want to add a new emission type. So not just sideband, but digital waveforms. They're going to have various waveforms. I'm not sure they specified what kind of digital waveform. Could be frequency shift keying, FSK, OFDM, QAM, phase shift keying, PSK, etc. And they propose up to 50 kilohertz wide. They also are proposing to increase power to 20,000 watts, 20 kW. Now that's quite a bit. That's a lot above our 1,500 watts. And they even included a proposed spectral mask, and that's what that image on the right is. You can see their proposed spectral mask in red and compare it to the existing 2.8 kilohertz spectral mask in blue. So what they're going to do is put out lots of energy quite far away from their center frequency. And that's could be a big problem. So what did they evaluate to end up with 20 kilowatts and a 50 kilohertz waveform? Now they looked at signal levels at distant stations using VOACAP, the Voice of America Communications. Well, I just went blank, but that's okay. VOACAP, the propagation prediction programs. And what they did in their evaluation, they assumed a 20 kW transmitter with 1 dB of coax loss. So that's 16 kW at the antennas. They assumed 10 dBi directive antenna. And from the stations I've seen, that's about 10 dB low. So they're going to have much more gain than they're proposing. They looked at 3 phases of a solar cycle, minimum, an average cycle, and a big cycle. 5 frequencies from 4.9 to 24.8, 4 seasons, 6 times a day, and 4 different noise environments. So they did a pretty good evaluation of what potential interference they could cause to distant stations. In other words, via ionospheric hops. So we're not talking close stations, nearby. And what was their criteria for no interference? Well, they did recognize that they need some suppression from a filter. And they said with 35 dB of out-of-band suppression, it should be easily accomplished using filters. The interference at a distant location would most of the time be at or below the local noise level. So on the surface, you see, well, that's okay. If it's at or below my noise level, I probably won't hear them, so it'll be okay. Well, there's some issues there. If their interference is at the noise level, that means the noise floor will be increased by 3 dB. And one of the big issues they didn't consider was interference to our newer digital modes, FT8, FT4, all the other ones that can decode signals many dB below the noise floor. So they could interfere very far away with a lot of our digital modes. They didn't look at interference to local receivers. In other words, someone that's kind of near their antennas. They claim they have never had any reports of interference. One thing I can comment there is, how would someone know who to report to? and what, could they determine that it was man-made interference versus something else? They didn't talk about broadband noise. In other words, the phase noise out of the transmitter design. And nothing about RF exposure limits. Hopefully you're aware that we now have to look at RF exposure at our site to make sure we're not dumping too much RF into people. Some sites may be compliant, some sites may not be compliant. We'll take a look at that here in a little bit. Okay, I mentioned the interference to a nearby receiver. Well, here's a great example that the ARRL lab worked out. This is on 20 meters. And they're blue. The blue curve is the field strength from from one of the HF trading stations versus distance from the local receiver. And at 3 miles away, their spectrum would be about 90 dB above the residential noise floor. Residential noise floor well, that should be 14 megahertz, not 1.8 megahertz. But 90 dB above the residential noise floor, that's pretty mad. You're not going to hear a thing. Even if you go to 6 miles away, their interference would be about 80 dB above the residential noise floor. So they could interfere quite a bit with stations if they happen to put one kind of close to your location. Now here's a picture of a spectrum of a station. This is one in the Chicago area. The center frequency is 14,365 kilohertz, right above our 20 meter phone band, right? We end at 14,350. Now the red lines are the 20 kilohertz bandwidth. And you can see if you just say, well, okay, it's only 20 kilohertz wide, so it's not gonna, it'll only get down to 14,355, half the bandwidth. So that might be okay, but their emissions go farther out than farther down from the top end of the 20 meter band. The yellow line is their proposed spectral mask, and you can see far out, they don't meet it. And it could interfere with the high end of 20 meters. Now, just remember, this is just a 20 kilohertz wide digital signal. They're proposing up to 50 kilohertz wide. So they could really do some interference depending on how close they get to one of our band edges. So here's an actual station. I've visited this a couple times. It's in Moneta, Indiana. It's kind of on the west side of Indiana. They've got 2 towers. The top and bottom antennas on each tower are pointed northeast to major, economical cities. And the antennas on the top and the bottom on those 2 towers are made by M Squared. That's a very well-known amateur radio. Of course, they make stuff for commercial too. It's a 14 to 20 megahertz log periodic dipole array. So it covers 14 to 20 megahertz. It's got 15 elements on it. And so those are first thing I thought of when I saw this station was, how could I remote into this? Heck, man, this would be great for Europe. Ooh, oh well. The middle antennas on the left, that one's pointed to the northwest. Could be Chicago, Japan, probably Japan, maybe Seattle area. One on the right tower is pointed northeast. They're 10 element log periodic dipole arrays. And you can see, if you look close, on the elements have some lumps in there. And I believe these are for the lower frequencies, because when you're at solar minimum, you're going to have to do some work below 14 megahertz. Now, those top antennas are at 46 meters. So that's a good 150-foot tower. And if you look at the gain of those antennas, they run the top 2 and the bottom 2 all in phase. So you got 4 antennas. And the gain of those antennas is something like 20 dBi around there. That's about 10 dB more than what they did their evaluation at. So signals are going to be stronger than what they considered. Now, this station is licensed under Part 5, which is experimental radio service, because that's the whole intent, was just to determine if this is a good system to do what they want to do. They weren't really supposed to, they're not supposed to be doing any trading, but we don't know if that occurred or not. It could have been. All of these stations should be licensed, but we're aware of one that in Naperville, Illinois, that doesn't appear to have a Part 5 license. And Laura Smith, that's her name at the FCC. She has been made aware of this, so we'll see what happens. One of the guys who made comments to the rulemaking 11953, we'll get into that a little bit later, put together a map of where these stations are because they're licensed under Part 5, so you can go figure out where they are. In the Washington area out northwest, Washington State, there's 7 of them. Chicago area, there are 20. On the East Coast, there are 10. Who knows? By now, there may be some more. This map doesn't have the Wanata, Indiana station on it, but that's okay. It shows that they're springing up major financial centers. Now, there's a gentleman named David L. Wilson. I think he's a ham, but I don't know what his call is. He has visited many of these stations in the Chicago area. And for each station he visited, he has taken pictures of the antennas and images of the waveforms on a spectrum analyzer if they were transmitting. And one thing he saw was many different waveforms. So there's no, just let anybody run whatever they want. So who knows what the FCC will do about that. If you'd like a copy of his latest report, just send me an email and I'll send it to you. It's pretty fascinating. It's something 36 pages or something like that, with a bunch of sites on there and waveforms. Pretty interesting to look at it. Now, the waveform that we saw on slide 9, here's this is the station that was emitting that in Illinois, and those are the antennas. So it's a pretty hefty station. That would do ham very good. That's for sure. That's for sure. I mentioned RF exposure limits. One of the problems is RF can heat up critical areas of the human body, mostly the eyes and also the genital areas. So there are exposure limits that we need to comply to. There's an image of one of these stations from K9LA in Lockport, Illinois. You can kind of see that it really doesn't appear to have a fence around it, and it's close to apartments. So I'd be concerned that the human body may be taking more RF than the limits specify. Now, the one in Wanata, Indiana, it looks like they knew what they were doing. You can't see the fence, but there is a fence. Yeah, you can kind of see the fence. It's a pretty wide area, and just a cursory evaluation to the RF exposure limit says it's okay if you don't get into that fenced in area. And it's in the middle of a farmer's field. So I think they knew what they were doing. What about other countries? Well, Canada and Japan are reviewing petitions. I've not heard anything from anyone on that, though. The rulemaking RM-11953 had about 900 comments as of October 31st. Several go deeper into the technical issues, and they're very interesting to read. One is N9GL. He's the chair of the ARRL Safety Committee. There's a bunch of guys they call themselves the Dayton Group. They make some good technical evaluations. Of course, the ARRL did a lot of work there. Alex Pilosov, he's very familiar with the activity of these trading stations, and he really wonders why they need that much power and why they need that much bandwidth. So hopefully that'll be a good factor in our favor. And there are some more with great comments. And one of the examples I pointed out was Fred, W9KEY. And I'm pretty sure I heard his call there who was there. So RM 11953, there's the URL. You can go there and you can see all 898 of the comments. You could spend a lot of time reading. The other way to do it, if you don't want to go to that URL, is just Google RM-11953. And then when that page opens up, select ECFS-filing search results link, and that'll get you there too. Remember, you'll have a PDF of this presentation, so you can don't have to copy anything down here. So where are we headed? Well, the next step would be a notice of proposed rulemaking from the FCC. And I made the comment earlier that the FCC is really slow. They are finally going to consider a bill introduced by the ARRL in 2013. That's the symbol rate change to bandwidth bill. So who knows when something's going to happen. I really don't know when, and our FCC counsel for the ARRL, K9LA, has no idea either, even though he keeps in touch with FCC people as much as he can. He is a former FCC employee. We do need a better understanding of the modus operandi of these stations. Do they transmit 24/7? We're pretty sure they must go both ways, because if you send an order to do something, you certainly want to get receipt that it happened. So more than likely, these stations are going both ways. We need to document more instances of interference to amateurs. And I'm aware of K9PG had a problem, and he documented it. And I believe that went to Laura Smith of the FCC, so we'll see what happens. Now, Joel, W5ZN, he's a former president of the ARRL. He's now the International Amateur Radio Union Secretary. Advises that the agenda for the World Radio Communication Conference in 2027 would likely address this. WRC 23 is being held in this month in Dubai, but the agenda was already set a couple of years ago, so it does not include this issue. The pace of the development of wireless technology is continually increasing. So it's been discussed that maybe instead of every 4 years, they should be some interim world radio communication conferences to keep up with what technology is doing. So, yep, that's all I had. If there are any questions, I can try and answer them. Hopefully I went over enough that it gives you a basic idea what's going on and some of the problems, and also We just got to wait to see what the FCC does. Oops.
It's interesting, Carl, to see that the title of this, the modernization program,
Yes.
by taking technology back to the Stone Age, it seems like that's quite a name.
Yeah. It's oops, what's going on here? I can't. Oh, there we go.
Who is it
Yeah.
specifically that's proposing these stations and building these stations currently?
I didn't catch that.
Who specifically is proposing these rules and building these stations?
Who is?
Who?
Yeah. Well, it's a coalition of a bunch of guys who want to make a lot of money. And that's why they're the Shortwave Modernization Coalition. It's a group of companies, technical and financial, and they want to make more money.
The little bit I read previously on this has to do with second by second trading, where they can incrementally buy and sell a stock as it's moving up and down, and they'll make pennies on each trade, which it's faster than the current system that is in existence, where they're using computers to monitor and do the trading with algorithms. Is that correct?
Well, it's the getting information from point A to point B is what the real issue is. Even if it's going over cable, there can be some delays, but the HF, it's going at the speed of light, and you could shave off milliseconds, and I guess that's an advantage. And that's why they're doing it. So basically, yeah, that's what the issue is.
Just, I did some research in this too and digging around, just to give you an idea of the magnitude of the money. Somebody paid $300 million to dig a hole through one of the Appalachian Mountains to run a fiber cable instead of going around the mountain, to save like tens of milliseconds.
Yeah.
So if it's worth 300 million to save tens of milliseconds, you can imagine what this thing is going to be worth.
Yep.
Carl, question for you. Do we know the extent of the experimental licenses that they have already acquired? In other words, how many of these stations could they put up while the FCC is pondering the problem?
Well, I know I haven't looked at them, but the experimental licenses do have a limit on how long they can exist. I don't know if many of these are out of date now, or if anyone's putting new stuff up. I don't know.
Carl, we have a request that you stop your screen sharing. So there we go.
There we go.
Yeah. I mean, you have such a beautiful face. We want to see the
Yeah, right.
Another question.
Yep, I can see them now coming.
Okay. Hi, Carl. This is Pat W9JI.
Hey, Pat.
Since it sounds like these stations are already operating, at least on some kind of a testing basis, any idea what the interference would sound like, so that if I would hear something, I would know that it was this as opposed to some other kind of
Yeah, like power line noise or
power
something.
lines or some other kind of noise? I'm wondering if there's maybe any recordings or something of these.
I'm not, I don't know if there are recordings of those. That's a good question to ask. I can see if I can find something out. But I think the best way is just to look at a spectrum analyzer and have a little catalog of what the various digital waveforms look like. And you might be able to match them up.
Okay, 'cause it sounds like if this is going to be causing some interference, that it's going to be some pretty profoundly noisy interference.
If you're close by, yes. You know, if you're within 5 to 10, 15 miles, I think you assume if you lose everything, it's probably one of them. If you're farther away, well, of course, you know, they have very directive antennas, so you got to be in the line of sight of the antenna. So you could be close to one of these guys and maybe off the back or off the side, and it won't be as bad. So it's hard to say how much interference you'll get.
Sure. I mean, it sounds like there's quite a bit of unknowns at this point, but
Yeah.
interesting topic. And I guess I'd be interested in some, like how to detect or how to identify this. So we'd be able to know if it's going on, and then who to contact with reports of interference, if that would be just FCC field office.
I'll probably go through the ARRL. The guy you'd want to talk to is Steve, W1EMI. His suffix is electromagnetic interference. He's the EMI guy in the ARRL lab, and he logs in complaints, and maybe we could correlate them to something going on at one of these stations, perhaps.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Very
Yep.
interesting.
Okay.
Any other comments? Carl, I would ask you, it seems to, this is Bill Greaves, K9GN. It seems like one of the important things here is what you mentioned on one of your slides, which is, and Pat was talking about, which is identifying the interference, because down the road, if it's going to take the FCC 5-8 years to actually get to this, to rulemaking, you know, the coalition could come back and say, well, we've been transmitting for 5 or 8 years and going up to 50, megahertz bandwidth, and we don't have any complaints or very few complaints.
Yep.
And that would certainly undermine the ARRL's position.
Yeah.
So,
now you got to remember that there were also comments from like the Coast Guard, because there's maritime radio service in the 2 to 25 megahertz. And there's a lot of other services that could be impacted, not just ham radio. So I think they're quite aware of what could happen too. And they're keeping their eye on all this stuff.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Carl. I think we will be in touch as far as how we can continue to bring updates to our membership
Okay.
in the near future. But suffice it to say, thank you for this presentation tonight. You are more than welcome to hang out and be a participant and for the rest of our meeting. I do know that there are meetings after the meeting is in Zoom, and you're more than welcome to even come back using the same access that you did for this meeting.
Okay.
If you're interested in participating in the post meeting meetings in Zoom. So
Well,
again, thank you.
Okay. March, back in May, we adopted a litter of 7 kitties. So they're 8 months old now, 7 of them. So I think I need to go do some things. I am the chief litter box cleaner outer.
We all have our jobs, Carl.
That's right. Yep.
I do love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. You're welcome. Good night.
Thank
to
you,
everyone.
Carl.
All right.